So last week, we sort of culminated the evening with Frida Kahlo. And so, and I promised you that I was going to start with her. And as we progress on, you'll see that it makes sense. So, in this particular, can you all see this image?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an actual photograph of Frida Kahlo in bed, obviously, very sick. By the look of her on her face, she is in mid-career, meaning that she's probably in a very late 20s, early 30s. And she's doing a portrait. And the gentleman with the mustache in the center of the portrait is her father. And the woman on the right is her mother. And above her is her grandmother and grandfather. So she was, half Indio and half German, as I told you last week. What's interesting, there's a lot of little interesting things to see. The practice of her reading in bed, getting inspiration, and doing painting was constant. She always did that, and she spent a phenomenal amount of time in bed, given that she was incapacitated most of the time. She has magnificent earrings on. She has a collection of bracelets, Mexican Indian bracelets, and a lot of rings. So she was still very vain, and with this amazing sort of Mexican ribbon on her hat. So she's basically all dressed up. She's wearing lipstick, and there she is painting away. And what's interesting is that little kid is holding a little kid's drawing, almost as if the young man is showing her his work in the same way that she went to seek Diego Rivera to show him her work while he was doing one of the paintings in Mexico City. So, as I said last week, she is the only painter in the world who made so many portraits of herself. 100 times more than Rembrandt. Remember Rembrandt, when we looked at Rembrandt and we saw all of the portraits that he made of himself? But those things were commas in sentences, the content of which were not self-portraits, okay? So he did a lot of paintings of a lot of things, like we looked at the changing of the guards, we looked at the operation, etc. So, every once in a while he would do a self-portrait, almost like punctuation. For her, it was everything. It was subject matter. It was punctuation. It was a way for her to scream about her pain, scream about her condition. It was a way for her to propagate her very, very heavy-duty Stalinian communist theories. And incidentally, this is in her bedroom, if this photograph was taken 4 or 5 feet up, above the kid's head over that panel there was a portrait about 1 foot by 1 foot of Stalin, which she always had in her room. So in that sense, she was extremely naive politically, and she was very credulous of the propaganda line that Beria and Stalin were giving her. And I told you last week, they sheltered Trotsky, and he was killed there, etc. So, Frida Kahlo. Now, Elizabeth, she's not here. Ed, how do I get rid of the top bar?
The top bar.
It's confusing.
You want to move over to the other pictures, right?
Here.
Yeah.
Boom.
So go to
These little lines, you see 1, 2, 3, that makes them bigger, smaller.
Okay, thank you very much.
So if you want, you started here and then you're going to go back over.
Yeah, no, I know that.
All right.
Okay, so let me just check it out to see what we got. Okay. This is a painting by Diego Rivera, her husband twice over, because they got married, they saw each other, lived together, they got married. Afterwards, when she found that he made it with her sister, and he found that she made it with whomever, they got a divorce, and subsequently they came back together at the end. They got remarried. Now, this is a huge, immense panel that began to be painted in New York City. End of the 30s, early 40s, they asked, the Americans asked Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo to come to New York City and to do a mural in the Rockefeller building, which is still there, right on top of the skating rink there. And the idea was modernity and a kind of a history of the modern times. Now, Rivera did a fast drawing of it and showed it to Rockefeller, who looked at it sort of en passant, and he was mesmerized by the central image, you know, the modernity, cellular biology, astronomy, science, medicine, food, machine, etc. You know, the growing food for everybody on the bottom. I mean, it's a very optimistic, sort of dynamic, central image. And so he approved it. When Rivera set up his scaffolding inside the atrium of Rockefeller Center, and he started painting, people started to see that this thing was divided in half. And on the right-hand side, which if you looked out will be the left, obviously, okay, that's the communist world. And in the communist world, you have a statue of God as a fascist. He's holding on to the fascist symbol, and on it is a swastika. And the head is on the bottom, and sitting on the head on the bottom is are these people. Now, Guernica had just finished, and people think that he might have been inspired by Guernica's painting of Picasso because Picasso had a broken statue in Guernica as well, okay? Now, if you look in the center, above the red flag that has sort of social communist polemics written on it, is an image of Trotsky. On the right is an image of Karl Marx. And so, you know, on the extreme right, with a little sort of a Hitler mustache, is Mikoyan. And there you have sort of the members of the Politburo. You know, you have communism, the communist government. Above that, on the very top, along the sort of serrated, you know, dots on the very top, it kind of looks like the side of a film. That's the wall of the Kremlin. And behind the wall of the Kremlin, you have a lot of red flags with the Red Army marching. Don't forget, the Red Army, you know, was on the side of communism when they came back from having fought against the Russians in 1918, and they were instrumental in overthrowing the Tsar. And then on the left-hand side, you have the workers, both women, and the women, by the way, are in the middle. They take front, and men. And here you have the, you know, the sort of athleticism that Lenin, who is right here, was pushing health to all these people. And you see here, Lenin is very gently sort of holding, which I don't think is very gently, it almost looks rapaciously, holding the hands of some of the women and some of the workers that are surrounding him. On the other side, you have the West. And in here, the statue of God is whole. And you have the army, aviation, very aggressive gas masks and bayonets. Underneath, you have x-rays, you have science, you have an overwhelming amount of pets, because the communists at the time were saying that people in the West took better care of their pets than of their poor people, okay? And here you have, you know, mass sort of rich education, okay? In here, in between this sort of mirror shape and that molecular structure at the top on the left-hand side in the sort of triangular negative space, you have people gambling. You have very rich people dancing, gambling, wearing a lot of jewelry. And next to that on the left-hand side, you have a policeman beating up people who are on strike. Because in Chicago in the 1920s and 1930s, they were slaughtering strikers. I mean, they were using machine guns on them and cavalry. So it's a very negative view of capitalism. It's a very propagandistic, communistic view of capitalism. And on the right-hand side is a sort of righteousness of communism. Now, the figures are painted in a very, very Mexican way. What does that mean? It means that Diego Rivera, after having he grew up in Mexico, he took from a sort of a bourgeois family, not from a poor family. He was very well educated. He went to art school in Mexico. Subsequently, he took Les Grands Tours, and he went to Paris, and he went to Milan, and he went to Rome, and he went to Florence, and he went to Venice, came back to Paris, met Picasso, met Braque, met Léger, became friends with them. And while he was in Italy, he met Boccioni, Saverini, Carrà, and all the futurists. And consequently, he formed a very 20th century avant-garde system of seeing the world. And just to show you that, so by the time he came back to Mexico, let me just take that in a second. By the time he came back to Mexico, the Mexican Revolution was starting. And the Mexican Revolution was heavy duty because you had millions of Indios, of very, very ignorant. Ignorance is not a rank. It just happens to be an unfortunate condition. Not educated people, mostly Indian, 99% Indian, who lived in small villages, or if they worked in a city, they were fundamentally indentured servants to richer people. And by virtue of not being able to read or write, by virtue of never having studied history, by virtue of having been pushed into speaking Spanish as opposed to their Mayan or Aztec or Toltec or Huichol or whatever language they were speaking before, tribal language. It's not dead, by the way. They were still sort of secretly speaking it. They didn't know where they came from. All they saw was this sort of progress, the Industrial Revolution that came out of Europe and went into Mexico. They already had a revolution where they kicked the Spanish out. They were invaded by the French, Maximilian's troops before. But the nobles still basically kept the people under wrap. And so the people had a revolution. And the Mexican Revolution was, for all intents and purposes, a Marxist revolution. Don't forget that Marx wrote Das Kapital, the first book, in 1845. So we're talking about right after the First World War here in Mexico. So actually during the Second World War. So, First World War, not Second World War, First World War, between 1914, 1916, and 1918. So when he came back to Mexico, he decided that he was going to dedicate his life to painting the politics of justice and equality. And to do that, he was going to, as a painter, he felt he had the responsibility of painting the Mexicans, those figures, those people who are of the earth, of Pachamama, of this flesh that's used to being out in the sun, Spanish, Indian, muscular, dedicated, soft, motherly. And so he came up with colors and a system of making shapes that became quintessentially Mexican. You could feel, you can see, you can smell the Mexicans by what he did. But what he came out of before he embarked in doing that, in other words, what he studied when he went to Europe, and now he's sophisticated himself. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick tour. This is a self-portrait he made when he was 19 years old. Quite beautiful. This is a painting he did when he was 12. So as you can see, look at this, how beautiful this is. This is late teens, early 20s. So this would be one of those guys, what do you call them, that ride the horses to bother the bull at the beginning of a bullfight. Anyway, kind of a civil dress.
Toreadors?
No. Toreador is the Toreador is the matador. Toreador means the person who handles the bull. Matador is the person who kills the bull. I forgot the name of the those guys that put those lances on the bull's hump.
The picadores.
Picadores. Okay. So I'm interested in figures. So let me just get to look at this. This is highly stylized, very Art Deco, very French, really. Okay. With this is actually a British gentleman with the wheel in the background. Like today in England, you have this huge, immense wheel. And there it is, the symbol of the playfulness of the Industrial Revolution. And then in the Industrial Revolution in the background, the train on the very bottom, and the construction, and of course the tallest symbols of modernity, as De Kierkegaard, that we're going to look in a little while, was doing. And this guy is extremely well dressed, and you have to understand that this kind of dressing up happened in this particular way for the first time in history. And the reason for that was because of the sewing machine. The sewing machine was invented by Elias Howe in the 1840s, 1850s in Bridgeport. At the time, the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s came around, sewing machines were ubiquitous. You find them everywhere, from China to India to all over South America to, everywhere, in Europe, in North America, etc. And that meant that for the first time in history, they had stores that sold a bunch of ready-made clothes of different sizes. So people didn't have to go out and buy cloth and bring it to a tailor and get fitted and go back and get fitted again and then spend an inordinate amount of money for it. So the idea of being able to walk in a store and buying infinitely cheaper than going to a tailor, people started to wear all kinds of clothes because they could afford it. And so this is a symbol sort of that. This guy's putting on his leather, these are French leather gloves and all that. And again, this is Diego Rivera, and in here he's in Paris, okay? And he is influenced by Cézanne on the top, by Delaunay with that circle behind the child. We looked at, this is absolute influence from Cézanne at the bottom. That's an aqueduct, a Roman aqueduct in the bottom, smokestack from the Industrial Revolution. And the sun, by the way, being polluted out by the steam of the Industrial Revolution. And here's a worker. And the worker is manufacturing stuff. There's a pear on the top left, a little reminiscence of the fact that he was Mexican. So this is all his work that was really cubistic. This is a kind of a collage that has various materials like a match, sandpaper from those little matches with the drawers that they used to have and so on. This is it's a wonderful sort of a combination between Futurism and Cubism. This is all Diego Rivera. Huh? This is influenced by Picasso. So you can't get more modernist at the time than this world. I mean, here's somebody doing a variety of ways of looking at somebody on the same panel. So it starts off on the right with the back of kind of like a back profile of the person's head. Then the person turns towards us. Then it turns away, and we can see simultaneously the whole thing. We talked about that. Same thing here. So this guy that was doing this comes to Mexico. And the influence, by the way, and there were thousands of people painting guitars and mandolins at the time, straight out of Picasso. I always thought this was a funny one because it looks like a duck up on top. Let me get to the figures. Here it is now. Beautiful painting, very moody. If anything, it's sort of reminiscent of Picasso's work in his early 20s. And then he comes to Mexico, and here it is. Now, when he gets to Mexico, he is taking it upon himself to create a story of the actual story of Mexico. And that includes what Mexico used to look like before the Europeans got there. And then the kind of enslavement and cruelty and rapaciousness that the Spanish had in conquering of Mexico. So here, and he wants to do it. He figured out a way to make figures that were extremely clear in content, in costume, in gesture, and therefore in intention, in order to show the people what happened in their countries. These people had no idea of this. So now you had a revolution. The Indians started to go to public school. They started to learn how to read or write. The parents didn't know that. The grandparents didn't know that. A lot of the children still didn't know that. So wherever these people went, if they went to get a hunting license, they walk into a building that had murals like this, painted by Orozco, Siqueiros, or Diego Rivera, up against the wall. And while they were waiting for the lights, they would look and they would see bus terminals, air terminals, railroad stations, schools, government buildings, departments of governmental bureaucracy, all had painted. Some of them had sculptures, and many of them had murals made out of a mosaic, a ceramic, or in Siqueiro's case, aluminum and metal collage. So what are we looking at here? At the very top, you see the Spanish galleons coming in from the sea. As soon as they get there, they start to hang the natives. Then they enslave them, and they make them extract coal and gold from the mines. And then at the urging of this monk holding onto a cross. And here's an American, a blonde guy, okay, dressed up like an American trapper, telling the Indians to aerate the ground. You have a combination between the monks and the soldiers on the very top that, in the name of the cross, enslave the people. And on the bottom left, you have somebody, what do you call it when you put a hot iron? Branding a slave. And this is very accurate. The costumes are very accurate. The branding is accurate. Even the foot on the very bottom left, there's a Spanish soldier standing on like a foot cuff as opposed to a handcuff. Very accurate. And here are the Americans buying stuff from them, and the money exchange. And behind them are the people, and the new animals that were brought in from Europe: the donkeys, the sheep, the horses, the pigs, and particular cows, and so on. So this is a history. They chopped down the forest on the top right, they burnt it on the top right, etc. These people looking at this had no idea of this stuff. They were never told. They never learned it. They couldn't read. They couldn't go to school. So this was a way of using art, to a certain degree, in a way that Picasso used Guernica, in order to make a social political point of awareness, so that the artist now became revealer and teacher. So this is a small detail of a much larger painting. And what he did in here, after a lot of research, he literally did a Mayan city. And that's precisely what, actually, this was Texiclam. Texiclam, what the hell's the name of the old Mexico City? Texicatl. In Mexico City, there was like Venice. There were canals everywhere. So this is what Mexico City looks like. So this pyramid actually still exists. And he showed it to the people. The people look, and here's the people on the right and on the left. And when they were looking at it, they would say, "Oh my God, we did this. Our ancestors, our great grandfathers had a sophistication that looked like this." I mean, this thing made, the hovels of Paris look like crap in comparison, done at the same time. We're talking about, 900 years ago. So, and again, this is a small version. This is to install a sense of proudness to these people. What we just saw is at the very top right. So here you can see the difference. You can see Mayans and Aztecs, in their costumes, trading amongst each other, preparing food in a certain way, chucking corn, carrying sugarcane, building bridges, making rugs. I mean, on and on and on. And including those painted reliefs on the bottom that sort of imitate some of the reliefs that one finds in very stylized ancient Mayan or Aztec temples. In here, the Indians are smelting and making those cast and carved calendars. Beautifully painted. But you look at how Mexican they look. And they're very modernist. They're very simple. There's no detail, but the shapes are very round and very muscular, and at the same time, very sweet, kind of dedicated, and almost timeless. And at the same time, if you look at this painting, they are all extremely humble. There's nothing aggressive about them. They are working together to create a better society under a very poor situation. At the very bottom, you have somebody with a metate grinding blue corn in the very center bottom. Wonderful paintings. Again, very modernist handling. And here he's showing you what the ancient people would look like. And of course, we know exactly what they look like because they still look like that by the time the Spanish got there. And you can see by their paintings and their carvings and their statuary what they look like. So these people were looking and say, oh my God, this is the people that we come from. We came from such richness, and we have been reduced to such poverty and misery. We're going to pick ourselves up. We're going to make greatness again. That was the idea. It was the same idea that the American WPA had when they were having murals to sort of aggrandize, American manufacturing and American aggressiveness and American pioneering spirit and optimism during the Great Depression in the same system that they organized situations where they made these murals everywhere, including today the American Indian Museum downtown in New York City. There's a whole room. There used to be the old custom building that is completely painted with those WPA, worthy a trip just to see that. Forget about the American Indian Museum, which is beautiful. All right. Workers of the, so here's Trotsky. This is in the painting that we first saw, and here's Marx. Okay. So what does he got? Workers of the world unite in the Fourth International. So this is how how Marx's book opens. The book he wrote, Das Kapital, in the 1840s that we talked about. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. And underneath there, proletariat de todos los países, the proletariat of all the people unites under the international paper system. But again, look at the way the paintings are done. Those people are amazingly simplified and very powerful. Here's Lenin that we looked at before. Look at a child drinking milk on the left-hand side. Right in between, the world as minor in the world as maxi. In other words, the cellular world and the universe. So right in between that is creativity, is life. This is an interesting painting, which unfortunately I couldn't find larger, but you might look for it and then blow it up on your computer. But this is a painting that Diego Rivera did that is very interesting because it's in a kiosk. It's in the middle of a garden in the center of a city, an inner garden of a city, a park, an inner park like Central Park. And parks were created because of the Industrial Revolution, the cities were expanding to such a degree that it got to be that if you lived in Centreville, if you lived in the center of the city, it would take you a long time to get out, to have a picnic somewhere, or just to be, in a forest. So they put the park in the center of the city. Central Park was done at the same time for that reason, the same time that the Le Grand Jatte was done in Paris, or Gorky Park was done in Russia and so on. So in here you have a Mexican park with a fountain in the background, springtime, obviously, and in the back is a small version on the left side, this guy with the striped socks. That's Diego, that's a self-portrait by Diego Rivera when he was a little kid. And he was a snotty, rich little kid with his grandmother wearing a boa and a lot of feathers, and she's super old. She was obviously dead. So this is a very Mexican homage to the world of the dead, okay? And his father. Now, if you look at him, he has an umbrella in his, it looks like Diego Rivera. He has the straw hat, which was the big thing to wear then. He has an umbrella, and the head of the umbrella is a vulture. Directly behind him is Frida Kahlo and her father. Okay? And Frida Kahlo, between Diego Rivera's self-portrait as a kid and the skull grandmother, is holding on to, with her hand right smack in the middle, a symbol of the yin-yang. The whole thing was protected by a cop. You see the cop on the right-hand side that always walked along with the rich people because they didn't want to be attacked by the poor. They were sort of protection. Why is Frida Kahlo holding on to a yin-yang? Because the concept of the yin-yang was the popular way where the hot bourgeoisie, or the very rich, made a sort of rationalize their position against the poor people. They said, well, there is good and evil. There is night and day. There is rich and poor. And everything has to live in a harmonious balance, like the yin-yang. So that was a way to take a wonderful Buddhist theory and to warp it with politics. So this is an interesting, Diego Rivera's political statement, almost as a kind of a confessional admission of the world that he had come from as a child. And this is a really bad photograph, but here you have the Mexican eagle holding on to a Mayan object, and standing on a cactus and a serpent. On the very top, you have the two white groups of warriors in the center on each side of the eagle are Mexican revolutionaries. They used to be called Los Descamisados, which means the ones without the shirt. And now they started to wear white outfits and wearing sombreros and carrying rifles and so on. In the center is Hidalgo. And Hidalgo was a priest who became a major revolutionary and a great hero of the revolution. Above that are a bunch of Mexican revolutionaries holding on to Tierra y Libertad, which means earth, in other words, our own land and liberty. So we all have to fight for land and liberty. So this is, the kind of, it's a wonderful painting. On the very bottom, there are symbols of Mayan traditional masks and symbolism. This sort of shamanic, mushroom-dictated fantasy of the ancient Mayan and Aztec religions. So here's Marx on the top. So I'm just showing you this to show you this is a takeoff, by the way, on the West. Oh, I forgot to tell you something. The first thing that we looked at, the big huge painting that Rockefeller had commissioned, Rockefeller, once somebody pointed out that Rivera put in all these communists, quote unquote, he went in there and told them that he had to take them out. And Rivera said, absolutely not. I showed you the drawing, you approved it, that's what I'm going to do, I'm the artist. And Rockefeller says, is that right? He says, well, it's my wall. So he paid him in full, it was unfinished, threw him out of the building, and he had the wall destroyed. When you walk in there today, the wall is still there. And he hired somebody else to put on this very freaky, sort of 1930, almost fascist, immense figure skipping from stone to stone. If you ever go to Rockefeller Center, just walk in and check it out. When Diego Rivera went back to Mexico, the Mexican government, having heard what happened, literally commissioned him to make that painting in Mexico City, which he did, and it's still there. This is a park. Okay, so this is a mural of Quetzalcoatl, which is the plumed serpent. Okay, so here you have a beak and an arrow for the eye, and the tongue of the serpent, double tongue, with feathers, and then a body. And the body comes from the water. You see bubbles on the left-hand side. The plumed serpent was a major symbol amongst the Indios in Mexico that had traveled north and adopted by the Zuni and the Hopi Indians still today. The Hopi Indians have a feather serpent called Pololocong that has origin in ancient Mexico. And the Zunis have one called Shulawitsi And Shulowitz looks more like this than the Hopi one. But, you know, here you have it. Today, we still have amongst us people whose credence still follows the same beliefs that these people had pre-Spanish conquest. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to get into the next, you know, there were three major, there were hundreds of them, but there were three major painters. This is Siqueiros. And so there was Rivera, Siqueiros. Before I say that, it's important, if ever you want to study it, to figure out who the other people are, okay? Because it's, there were many, many, many wonderful people. Again, we only have an hour and we have an awful lot to go on, and I don't want to spend the whole period on the Mexican Revolution. So this guy here is Orozco, and Orozco had come to the United States, and he started teaching in New York for a while. Orozco and Siqueiros. Some of their students were people like Jackson Pollock, by the way, okay? So let me show you what, this is a self-portrait, it's immense. And this is the kind of work that Siqueiros made. Now, if you go to Mexico City, or you go to Guadalajara, or you go to Zacatecas, or you go to Mazatlan, or, you know, many of the Mexican cities, and you look up on the ceiling of, let's say, the Parliament building, you have something like this. A person would be 1/5 the size of these people on the right-hand side. So this guy must have used a broom for a paintbrush, because they are massive to a degree that is incredible. They are classical figures, yet they're very modernist. So these people on the left are pure emotion. They're highly emotional ways of taking sort of Renaissance, sort of grand gesture, almost Michelangelo-esque figures, and putting them in a context of revolutionary fervor by using a modern technique of applying paint fast and with a lot of generosity of size. And you can see it's a little bit different, but not too unlike Diego Rivera. But again, very tight compositions, very sort of Art Deco background, but extremely Mexican. The colors are Mexican. You know, the figures, I mean, you look at a person's legs on the bottom, it's Indio legs. They are, you know, those legs have carried water up and down a hill every day for 50 years, you know, and it looks like that. And again, tremendous amount of resolution and humbleness. And this is Hidalgo. Now, this is a small detail of an immense, immense panel that is on both sides of a staircase in one of the government buildings in Guadalajara. Here you can see the size of some of these murals. We're going to see that part on the right a little bit later on. This is God, and he's trying to chase away the serpents. And again, very modernist, very strong, almost architectural in its composition, taking advantage of Renaissance perspective, but very dynamic. This is a detail of the one that we saw before this. So here is science, and science is taking apart the dead. Why? What's he saying? In the universities, they used to use homeless people who died in the streets. They would take them, they would bring them into the university, and over there they would learn how to take them apart, and they will make doctors out of them. That became a big polemical thing to do. So this is kind of a version of that, including, you know, the idea of taking, you know, mothers, dead children, and putting them under formaldehyde and putting them in medical schools. So this is a kind of a comment on that. As a little aside, check out on the bottom right is a doorway, so you can see the size of it. Here is a building. The centerpiece is a phenomenal composition. You know, the center where the belts are, you know, pointing at the guy who, you know, who's been hurt and who's crying on the bottom right. And then you got this big, tall lance on the very top, the black lance that then falls into the arm, The arm keeps going and falls into the second arm. That keeps going and falls to the ground with the guy on the right. Fantastic painting, wonderful composition, very modernist, yet ancient, almost timeless. And a lot of heart. Here's the rich. You know, the guy on the left looks like straight out of Charlie Chaplin. But look at the figure. They're almost like you know, they're not robotic. They're sort of léger-ish. You know, exaggerated. They're almost a caricature. Yet there's a strength to them. They're highly volumetric. Here you see some of the buildings, and you see what people, you know, when people go into a building to get, you know, let's say to make documents, this is what they see. Look at the very center bottom. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 faces in the same head. How's that for modernism? Okay, we're gonna keep going, otherwise we'll be here forever. This is Tomb, Orozco. Fantastic tombstone. Okay, so this is wait, hold on a second. I'm trying to figure out what I don't know what the date is. Anyhow, so this is Siqueiros, and Siqueiros again did the same fundamental thing, but in this case, look at what's going on. This is a horse. Okay, so these are like the front paws that are both shooting out and coming in. The body of the horse and then the back paws underneath there. This guy here on the right, that's a feather serpent. One of the ones that is on the bottom of the railing of one of the pyramids. This guy used a tremendous amount of different materials. This is a building that has been carved. Small photographs I'm going to skip along. In here, this is a painting he did in 2 days, and it's immense. And so he used color in the same way almost that many of the modernists used, which is to create an area of color and then with a black line go over the area of color. So that gives the impression of the color. Leger used it, and many other in the 20th century. We're going to look at them later on. So take a look at the people on the bottom, get an idea as to how big this is. So this is when the president and the vice president give a speech to the Congress, you know, to the people in the Mexican government. He gives a speech where this woman in the center is taking the photograph. That's where his head is, okay? Imagine the vice president, our vice president, coming over here, giving a speech with his head right here, in between the breasts. Incidentally, this is Siqueiros' wife. She posed for this, and it's immense. Very, very powerful. Breaking of the chains. This is one of the ceramic mosaics. Actually, it's pietra dura, but it's ceramic that he did in. I think this is. Where me see. Università, the National Autonomous University of Mexico. This is the National Autonomous University of Mexico. This is a combination between different kinds of metal and cement. So in here, he did a whole entire building. Very modernist, but they're people, huh? This is figurative. So you can see the people on the very bottom. You know, you come up and you can see the rear end a little bit. Then you see the heads above that central area. And this is the same guy when he was younger. One of his wonderful sculptures. This is a steel sculpture that is a combination between welding and casting. He made dozens of these. And it's very difficult to achieve that kind of volume and thrust that in painting comes relatively easy because you're working as I mentioned on a panel when you have to do it spherically in a three-dimensional surface. Straight. Okay. So, let's come back to the United States. This is an American who died in 1984. His name is Leon Golub. And Leon Golub dedicated his life. He was an activist because we're talking about, starting with Guernica and going into the Mexican Revolution. And now I'm just sort of dragging that into the United States briefly because this will be the last one. So this is a guy who painted tortures and situations of great cruelty that the government made. And this is about the CIA. And this is about, what was going on in Argentina and in Brazil and in Colombia and, and in the United States and in Vietnam and in Germany and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is very hard stuff to digest. And nobody would ever buy this and hang it up on a wall. But nevertheless, he was recognized for his amazing vivacity of crime, his vivacity of the negative part of the human condition. This is a fantastic painting that he did, because if you read in the bottom, it says Leon Golub's men behaving cruelly. This is by Hartfeld, and it's a fantastic painting. I mean, it is paint. You get rid of the face, and it looks like abstract expressionism, but the color, the way the gesture of the application of the color is phenomenal. And you can see how this guy Hatfield, and here's some more of his work, you can see how he was influenced by things like this. Golub, right? Fundamentally the same palette, fundamentally the same sort of strike of gesture, almost a desperation of paint application that is as desperate as the actual figurativeness that goes into these situations. Okay, not pleasant to look at, but it's a way of using the figure to make a political statement and to sort of bring out the worst in the human condition. Why? Because if art, and I've said this a billion times, if the definition of art is that it's a language, it's a visual alphabet with which we describe, with which we reveal, with which we explore the human condition. The human condition goes from the, from the divine to the repugnant. Okay, so now this is a guy who is, wait, hold on one second. I'll tell you when he was born. I don't have, well, you have to look him up. This is a guy who's a painter who also painted a lot of sort of poor people and very, very, very common situation. His name was Renato Gottuso, Gottuso. And Renato Gottuso was very big in Europe, never that big in the United States. He was an intimate friend with Picasso. And this is one of his paintings. And, and in here you have photographs of what the markets in Italy look like, basically. And so there's a quality to them. There's a color situation to them that he captured beautifully. And the way they painted the figures was not an aggrandizement of the figures. They are as humble, as normal, and as non-involved in any kind of theatrical action as you would find during the Renaissance or you would even find later on by some of the painters. In this case, it's almost a snapshot, but it's a snapshot of the bounty of normality. This is another Gottuso on a very different subject. So in here you have a number of figures that reveal the way that he felt about the concept of crucifixion. Okay, so here you have the two thieves, the red one and the one behind Jesus in the center. And here you have a nude woman covering Jesus. Here you have a woman in pure desperation. Here you have a horse with Judas behind it counting his money. Here you have the instruments of torture that the Romans might have used, you know, to cut him up, to put vinegar in his wounds, and so on. And in the background, you have this world under a very dark, almost tumultuous sky. You have this world of sort of damned urban city that looks, for all practical purposes, like a kind of a structure. So it looks like a Cezanne painted by Morandi. But the composition of this painting is fantastic. If you take a look at as an example, I'll just give you one really quick thing. Take a look at the division between the world below and the world above. That division is made by the cross of the red person. You follow the cross to the left, and you end up across the other thief into the white line that goes all the way over to the left of the painting, dividing the two areas together. That division is broken by the head of the guy on the left, who's a witness, by the thief on the left, by Jesus in the center, and by the arms of the red guy. I mean, it is, you know, we can sit here for an hour talking about the wonder of the composition, but this is a way to use figure in the most simple and yet complex possible method of description. Here we have George de Chirico. Now, George de Chirico was born in a city was born in Greece. His parents came from the city of Ferrara in northern Italy. His mother was a seamstress and a fantastic cook. His father was a road engineer. He was born in Greece because his father was he was hired by the Greek government to design tunnels and roads and railroads for the country of Greece. We're talking about at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. When the Chirico got to be 12 years old, they started to travel back to Ferrara, back to Italy. And he ended up going back to Italy and then going to Paris, and then living in Paris for a while, and then going back and living in Rome for the rest of his life. He was the person who used the figure for the first time officially as a metaphysical entity. Metaphysical meaning surreal. Why metaphysical? Why surreal? Because surreal means more real than reality itself. So we have the physical, tangible, everyday, digital reality, you know, of this table and this computer. And then we have thoughts, and we have temperatures, and we have being afraid, and we have being in love. And here we have the world of dreams, both daydreams and night dreams. That is an ephemeral world that we can't touch, we can't feel, we can't put that in our pocket the way we can an object. And that is methane, is gas. So you have metaphysical, and you have surreal, more real than reality, because the reality has been what painters and sculptors and artists have always addressed, the physicality of a painting or a sculpture or a relief or whatever. But surreal means more real than that, because it also brings into play, it also causes a reality by actually by finding a way to address things that are beyond the physical reality, like I just explained, like the world of dreams. Nevertheless, this guy used perspective in the painting specifically to make the eye fly around the painting by giving a different kind of perspective. He always deals with time. As an example, there's a gesso of a kind of a David character on the left-hand side, a child's toy in the bottom, and his mother's rubber glove, which never existed, in history. So the rubber glove is a symbol of domestic accustoming to modernity. On the right-hand side, you have this very mysterious Roman classical world, and on the bottom left, you have a train. You have a locomotive with a puff of smoke coming out of the chimney. I'm going to skip 2 figures. This is too small. Hold on. Okay. So what do we have here? First of all, we have an atmosphere, and the atmosphere is reminiscent of when the sun is going down because the shadow on the left is very strong. So sunset is a very melancholy time of the day. The morning is the beginning, the sunset is the end. It's the beginning of night, it's just before death. The sun has gone down, everything has been warmed by the sun. The sky is beginning to change color. And here you have this desert architecture with the exception of an entity way off in the background that is too big to be a person, therefore it has to be a statue, right? And in the center, you have an assemblage, excuse me, which is a kind of a monument to the concept of art. What is the monument? What is the monument made out of? It is made out of one of his mother's mannequins, because she was a seamstress in the very top. The mannequins was something that George de Chirico became obsessed by, because as you walk into a room and if there's a mannequin, you know, it's a person, but it's not. So it's, when I was a kid, we had a mannequin. We had 2 mannequins in the house, and I told my students this. I used to walk out of there. I was sure that once I left the room, those mannequins would start to dance together or communicate with each other. They're very strange entities, and they get stuck with pins, and you know, there's all kinds of things about the mannequin. And then, so what's the mannequin writing? What's the body of the mannequin made out of? What is the monument? It is engineering and architectural instruments that his father had in the house that he forbid the Chirico to touch. But the minute his father left the house, he would go over there and he would make things with them because he knew that when his father wielded those instruments around, the result would be blowing up a hole in a mountain and putting a train through it, or building this bridge with a road on top of it. So he knew that somehow those instruments had a magic to them. And he didn't know what it was, so he started to use them to create his own magic. He started using them like building blocks for a little kid. And the consequence of that was this amazingly strange, wonderful, mysterious, almost unsettling, lonely painting. Very childlike and at the same token, profoundly surreal. Same thing with this painting on the right-hand side. Now, in the background of this painting, you see a red castle. That is the castle that is downtown Ferrara, the city that he was born in. On the left-hand side of this castle, you have smokestacks for the same precise reason that we looked at the smokestacks at the very beginning of the session. They symbolize the taking over of the skyline from what used to be church steeples or palaces or army forts. So in this case, you have the military, the nobility, and the church that are giving way to a new system, which is the Industrial Revolution, which is greed and construction and modernity. And here you have, again, his mother's mannequins, some of his toys. They are guardians. The one on the left-hand side is standing on top of a kind of a square Greek column. It's a very strange thing. Again, same setting of night, same playing with the exaggeration of perspective. And a ditto here. Incidentally, George de Chirico had a brother named Savigno, who was a phenomenal painter, S-A-V-I-N-O, N-I-O, S-A-V-I-N-I-O, Savigno. Savigno was an incredible musician. I mean, amazing musician, and he was an amazing painter. If you get a chance, check out Savigno. They used to fight together all the time, those guys. So, this is a way. Now, what's interesting about this is that when Rivera came to Italy, he met de Chirico because this was like, this stuff is done like in 19 he started making this kind of paintings around like 1914, 1913. This is done in the 40s, but it's just a continuum. But take a look at those legs and how Rivera and Orozco and those guys used this sort of strong volume of these legs. Or like this. Okay. Now, this is a guy named Casorati. And Casarati was a great painter who is highly influencing a lot of American painters today. My friend Alan Feltis, whose work we're going to see the last class, has been greatly influenced by Casarati. And what happens is that a lot of American painters went to get won the Prix de Rome. And the Prix de Rome is it's a prize that is given to painters of a certain quality, and you win, you apply for it, and you go to work in Rome for a year, and some of them stay there, like Alan Feltis ended up living there. And Casarati is one of the people that is highly influential to a lot of figurative American painters. This stuff was done in the 1930s. Okay, so beautiful composition, very bright situation. Look at this painting. Now this painting on the right-hand side is a kind of a takeoff of a painting done by Mantegna in Mantova around 1430. That is at the Brera Academy in Milan today, where I went to school. This is a magnificent painting. The color sense is fantastic. The black hat and red shoes at the bottom, the white, wonderful, simple amphor on the top right, the different color of the women, the whimsicality of the feet, the shoes on one side, feet on the other, hat in the middle. Beautiful, beautiful composition. So you should be aware of who this gentleman was, Casarati. And here we have somebody who is, we sort of mentioned him last week. His name is Balthazar Balthus. He was Polish-French. His real name was Klosowski de Rola. He painted erotically pubescent girls, unfortunately. His work is very refined, is very dreamlike. It is exquisite in composition. And one of the people that highly influenced him was Piero della Francesca. Now, this is a painting, the composition of which, the position of which is very strange. They're playing cards. You don't know if this guy is cheating. You don't know what he's thinking of. It's highly abstract to a certain degree, yeah. It's very simply figurative. This is one of his masterpieces, but it has a very dark side. There's a maid on the right-hand side with a spoiled little kid with a sailor hat on. You have this kid in the center, that looks like the German-American actor from the 1940s that says, you dirty rat. I don't know what his name was. But anyway, and then, of course, on the left-hand side is somebody attacking this little girl. And at the same token, there's this very strange chef that's kind of stiff. And this painting has so many different elements of compositional mystery. The fact that the guy in the center, his leg is interrupted by the blue racket that's painting, that's pointing to that kid in yellow ochre, who is, you have no idea as to what he's thinking about. His arm is on the other hand pointing to her. Her arm is pointing to the maid. It is a constant relationship of making the eye drag itself around. For some reason, hard to explain, her hat look at the abstraction of the square directly behind that black head with that sort of round cross on it. A super abstract situation. Next to that is another very abstract, almost like a dark Rothko over the kid's head. Next to that on the right is another square, which is the head of the little kid in the arms of the woman. On and on and on. Balthus. This is, again, another major compositional piece by him. There's a table here underneath which this girl is reading a book next to her cat, who has this sort of feline, who cares attitude. And this girl, you don't know if she's asleep, if she's in ecstasy. You don't know what's happening. But somehow, this table is lurid. And it's presented against this very strange, almost Venus, laying Venus love seat. And part of the curvature makes sense in relation to the curvature of the piano on the right-hand side. So the guy really understood his composition and his colors and all that, but he should have been arrested. And here's again a young woman her boyfriend's making a fire and she's looking at, but again, the composition, the atmosphere, the color, the mystery, the world of dream. And here we're back to Frida Kahlo. And we left the last week by looking at this. And this is a wonderful painting, and I'll summarize it, because in here, she's holding herself in relationship to the way that she perceived herself as being a proper Western woman and a local Indios woman. And she's embracing the other, and the other is embracing her. And the heart is going together to the other heart, who is sort of wrapped around. I mean, it's fantastic. And in this case, she's holding on to scissors that doctors have. And in here she's cutting, and in here she's cutting, in the modern version, she's cutting the vein of her heart. So in here, she's going to die. In here she lives. It's a very interesting painting. So that's it, boys and girls. We went over a little bit, but then we started a little bit late, so that's the story. Are there any questions? Well, next week, we're going to jump into something totally different than this. We're going to look at a lot of American figurative painting, some of whom began as abstract expressionists and then gave it up and became figurative. In other words, the other way around than one would think. And then the last class, we're going to get into contemporary figure work. And we're going to see what happened, what happened from let's say, 1980 to today in 40 years. That will be the last class, okay? Thank you very much. Before you split, one thing. Tony Coretta on Facebook has featured my trains, the first 8 trains I made. So if you get a chance, check out Tony Coretta's Facebook page, and you'll see some documentaries of my studio, an interview, and a bunch of photographs. And if you have any comments to make, please put the comments in the thing. One more thing real fast. There was an ebook that was made by this amazing gentleman named Robert LaMarche, who's an amazing photographer, a wonderful person. And he made this for the last 3 years. He's been working at it. This 320-page ebook that includes around 650 photographs that he took of 20 of my trains, 160 pieces altogether. It is a magnificent book. It's going to come out officially probably in 3 to 4 weeks. I'll let you guys know, okay? Have a good night.